Congressman, thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Nice to see you. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Everybody.
Great to be with you. I don't know if you knew this. I worked for Jeff Bingaman in the 1990s, so I worked for the state of New Mexico for a long time. So good to see you here. Yes. I guess the thing I want to start out with is on this broad subject of diversity. How would you grade the U.S. Congress today?
Improving.
Improving. From what grade to what grade?
So, look, when you look at the ethnic and racial breakdown of members of Congress, this last election, it improved dramatically. But still, 90% of non-white members of Congress are on the Democratic side of the aisle. Only 10% on the Republican side of the aisle. So there's a lot of room for improvement. The Congressional Black Caucus has the most members it's ever had. The Congressional Hispanic Caucus has the most members that it's ever had. There's a record number of women serving in the U.S. House of Representatives. We had the first 2 Native American women elected to the Congress, the first 2 Muslim women elected to the Congress, the first 2 Latinas out of the state of Texas elected to the Congress, who are now serving with the first Democratic member elected, Lucille Roybal Allard, and the first Latina who recently retired, Ileana Ross Latenham. So it's hard for me to give it a grade. I would just say it's improving. There's room for improvement. And I'm very proud of the work that occurred in 2018. One of the things that I'm most proud of, as I was elected by my colleagues in 2018 to chair the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee and appointed by Speaker Pelosi in 2016. In 2018, we proved that candidates of color don't have to be elected from communities where they're the majority. When I was elected to Congress, and this may surprise a lot of people coming from New Mexico, my district's only 36% Hispanic. We need to break that mold where you're electing the best candidates across the country and you're identifying them and find them. And this last year, I think we proved that we can do it, that we should do it, and that you build an army that helps get the job done.
Now, I know in the DCCC there was some controversy over the staff and over about whether or not we were living and walking the walk about whether we were hiring diverse staff, maintaining diverse staff, or just checking off boxes. How is that situation today?
Well, so I'm very proud that when I was the chair of the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee, we had the most diverse staff that we had seen at the committee, whether it was staff in decision-making positions, part of the leadership that were African American, Latino, women. The first woman ever to run the IE. I brought on board the first Hispanic to run the DCCC. I was honored to hire. And I will say that as we went through August, where under the current chair, there was a lot of listening that took place, and I believe that the committee is in a stronger place now. But again, one of the things that I did when I was the chair of a major party committee was I voluntarily released our diversity numbers. There's only one way to hold us all accountable. Release the numbers. And that way every year you don't have to debate, well, was it 2 or 3 last cycle? No, you just go to the numbers, go to the chart. And I think that if we continue to do that in Congress, with our campaign committees, Democrat and Republican, corporate America, if we're gonna ask everyone to do this, then we should be willing to do it ourselves. And that's why I made that decision to voluntarily release those numbers as well.
We're all getting wrapped up, as I knew you are, struggling with impeachment and the impeachment process, what's going on. I think there are votes that are potentially happening today, as I understand it. Thursday. And in this climate of the issues with the behavior and the actions of the President of the United States, part of what has fallen into this is the divide racially, the divide about Muslims. There's been a lot that's been building up that's been frustrating for at least I know many of the Democrats. What are the most significant things that you have in mind that the president has crossed red lines? Which red lines matter most?
Look, when a chant is able to be led and not stopped by our commander-in-chief, when people yell out, send them back where they came from. And then it turns into a chant. And that was directed at Ilhan, at Rashida, at Alexandria, and Ayana. It's one of those things that's said that it angers you so much that it's being said about your colleagues, about these 4 women, all U.S. representatives. But then it's incredible how the mind works. And it takes you back in time where I'm sure many people in the room had the same experience I'm about to describe, where someone told you to go back where you came from and that you're not welcome. And it hits a much deeper emotional response where, one, you know this is wrong and you're going to stand up against this. It should not be happening from our commander-in-chief, nor anyone for that matter. But then when it hits that really deep emotional place that maybe you tucked away, it helps us understand why there was such pushback from people from all corners of America and around the world. When President Trump, during his campaign, singled out a Latino in Judge Gonzalo Curiel and suggested that this federal judge, Hoosier, University of Indiana graduate, could not serve on the bench because his parents were Mexicanos. Because he was Mexican American. What's he saying to people like me? I should be a U.S. representative? I should go back where I came from? I'm not doing the question justice because we don't have enough time. But the conduct and the words that are being used by this administration are not just beneath our values in the United States of America. These are beneath human interaction. And we've still come a long way, but we've made such small steps that anytime something like this happens, it takes us back further than where we started the progress from. The words that he uses with who I'll call anti-Maxine, but Chairwoman Waters, Frederica Wilson, suggesting that they're not intelligent people. I mean, all of these words matter, and they tap into the race and the hate that continues to spread all the way to policy decisions that have been made by this administration continuing to target the LGBTQ community, namely the transgender brothers and sisters that we have across America. That's what's concerning. So again, I don't know that I have enough time. We could probably write a book.
No, it's very powerful what you
this.
said, and I'm glad you brought the transgendered rights issue to the table, because at the end of the Obama administration, I had the privilege of interviewing a man named Eric Fanning. Eric was the gay Secretary of the Army, and he and his staff, along with Ash Carter, who was the Secretary of Defense, and others, secured the open rights and participation of transgendered service in the U.S. military. And I asked him whether he thought that would stand after Donald Trump's success, but Donald Trump hadn't been inaugurated yet. And Eric made the comment, it's really hung with me, kind of haunted me in a way. He says, rights are very hard to roll back. And I think that Eric was wrong, because we see clearly the rollback of transgendered rights in the military. And I wonder, you're a legislator, you have a co-equal branch of government, you're writing laws. I'm wondering whether or not there needs to be an enforcement dimension. What can we do, what can we see done to prevent the erosion of rights that had been previously secured for folks?
Well, one, the Congress cannot be silent on these issues. We need to be vocal. So when we talk about the attacks with transgender rights, the lack of support that we now have under Mitch McConnell and a Republican-led U.S. Senate, we passed the Equality Act out of the House. This is a non-controversial, no-brainer piece of legislation to adopt. And discrimination and hate, period. Take it up. So one, I believe that elections have consequences, and I'm not certain what more can be done until we see that shift in the U.S. Senate. But here's where I have some optimism from a party perspective going forward. Younger generations, these are not issues that divide us. Democrat, Republican, Independent, Libertarian, decline to state, whatever it may be. And that's why I have hope that younger generations, as we see our Republican Party get younger, that they will demand action. And they will stand up to the obstruction being caused by elected Republican leaders, as is the case with Mitch McConnell on the Equality Act. And we have to keep pushing this bar forward, all the way down to voting rights, to the point that rights may not be protected. The erosion of the enforcement actions pursuant to the Voting Rights Act by the Supreme Court, and a reluctance by our colleagues again in the U.S. Senate to take up provisions that we've adopted in the House to bring those provisions back, it should be very concerning to all of us. Why there would be policy to make it harder for people to vote, not easier for people to vote, is something that we should be asking. But when my colleagues can't win based on the maps that they have, they make it harder for people to vote, purge the rolls. There's actions that are taken to change the map, to change the rules. That's something that we all should not put up with. But again, the only place that we can take that forward, especially as it's coming forward at this point, given the current makeup, the House and Senate, the executive branch of government, is in November 2020.
One of my friends in the room here today is Javier Palomares. Javier was the president of the U.S. Hispanic Chamber of Commerce, and he reminded me recently in a conversation that 32% of Hispanics voted for Donald Trump, and which is it's a much bigger number than he thought was coming, and he has shared the fact that a lot of people voted for President Trump out of the Hispanic community because they felt demeaned, or they felt like they felt that they were not embraced by the Democratic Party. They did not feel that they're so I'm interested in your thoughts on that. Is it a healthy thing that a significant number of Hispanics voted for Donald Trump and identify with the Republican Party, or should there be is race and identity becoming a political divide that Democrats want to I won't say monopolize, but oligopolize?
Well, one, I see Javier in the room.
Yeah, there.
And I respect.
Is that okay? Is that a fair recount of what you said?
Yeah.
Good.
And I respect Javier very much. In 2016, something happened, and it was to the Latino community, to the African American community, and to the Asian American Pacific Islander community. There was a repeat of previous elections where candidates show up after early voting has begun into a community, and you go and you say, okay, now it's time to vote. You need to go vote, and the polls have opened. But a conversation was not had with the communities for the previous 2 years. So when I became the chair of the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee, we're midterm, so it's not presidential, so you're the game. And especially in 2018, where the map favored us more than it favored Senate pickups for Democrats across the country. So we instituted something that I know to be true and that I do at home. You need to make sure you start talking to people earlier. And we made a decision with the team at the DCCC that you're going to go into communities, even if communities of color, even if they're only 1% of a congressional district. Because we knew that if we won some of these races, it would be like a few hundred votes, right? And all of a sudden, 1% of a community matters so very much. But the only way you're going to get people to show up and vote is if you go knock on their door, if you talk to them, if they open you up on their screen and they invite you into their home, whether it's electronically or they invite you in to have some coffee. We also did something to the Latino community that Javier has talked about before. We're not a monolithic community. You can't just have one ad with one dialect of Spanish talking about one issue. It turns out that in communities of color, education matters, job opportunities matter, health and environment and injustice, it all matters. We're mainstream Americans as well. But you also have to understand that, especially in the Latino community, that you're made up of a lot of families. So I'm not going to send someone from New Mexico unless they're Cuban born or Puerto Rican to go speak to my brothers and sisters down in Florida. And even then, I better have friends from South America, from Mexico, from Cuba, and from Puerto Rico, right, with my American brothers and sisters from the island to go speak to those people. Otherwise, they're not going to listen. And here's something else that I did. I grew up at a time, and some of us in the room will understand this. My parents were in high school and junior high like in the 50s and 60s. They were punished in school with a ruler. I see some head shaking. On the back of their hand, on the front of their hand, or on the back of their neck when they would speak Spanish. When they were first Spanish speakers, their parents and grandparents were Spanish speakers. And in the case of New Mexico, as I proclaimed to President Donald Trump when he was in our state a little more than a month ago and asked a journalist, who do you like more, our country or Hispanics? I'm an example of a family whose the lines moved on us. Right before the Mexican-American War, before the Gadsden Purchase, my family was living in what was old Mexico. That is now New Mexico. So 11 generations strong there.
Did you send the president a note, by the way, about the Colorado-New Mexico border?
I think Senator, who was it? Senator Wyden probably drew a better map than I probably could have put together with that being said. But we made sure that where I was getting at is, in New Mexico, I grew up speaking Spanglish, right? A little bit of English, a little bit of Spanish. Because when my parents were in the room, I couldn't talk to my grandparents in Spanish, but they talked to me in Spanish. So it was like English and Spanish. And so even today, those words sometimes will evade me when I'm speaking or doing interviews. So I use a little bit of Spanglish. We did ads in Spanglish to families across America where we knew that those communities also spoke in English and Spanish. And we also did Spanish language ads. In the African-American communities, we listened to our colleagues in the same way that the Senate campaign did down with Doug Jones in Alabama. And we started reaching out to families with those church newspapers, with minority-owned, people of color-owned radio stations, television stations. Like, you know, it's not hard. But you got to put your money where your mouth is and show up and make sure you're talking to the communities, that you understand the diversity of the communities that we're trying to show we care about you. And we want to listen to you, we want to learn from you. And we're all better when we're together.
It's very powerful. I want to go to all of you in just a moment, but let me ask you one last question. It's taken me a while, but a lot of my, investigation and reading about America's legacy of investment, say in infrastructure or what we did in finance with home buying, there's a legacy of redlining, greenlining, or of whatever it is, discriminatory practices towards communities of color in this country. And the story is a bad one. I mean, it is where you go into cities and look at what freeway and highway decisions did to cut off communities. You go to Baltimore, where you've got 20-year life span discrepancies between different parts of greater Baltimore. And you look at the criminal justice system and you look at who's in jail and who's not when you look at that. And it's just an awful, awful picture. And again, from a legislative perspective, I know there's been some steps in criminal justice reform. In my book, they're pretty paltry. What do you think we need to do from an issue of fixing the lack of appreciation for the diversity of this country and the decisions that we've had in, bank financing and infrastructure investment decisions across the board? The reparations discussion is part of this discussion. What else do you think we need to do to rectify a lot of the wrongs in the past and begin getting on a better track?
Well,
in 2 minutes or less.
You follow the advice of Congressman John Lewis. You push and pull and you make some noise. You got to speak up. I mean, it's this notion of these injustices have continued to take place because good people have been silent, or good people's voices have not been amplified. The work that Cory Booker and Hakeem Jeffries did recently with justice reform, the attention that's finally being brought to communities where the smokestacks go up. I asked the previous, I don't know if he was acting secretary, or, Mr. Pruitt, when he was traveling around the country and around the world and we heard about the luxurious travel, asked him, how many communities of color or poor cities have you been to? Poor communities. Not a one. That's your job. And you look at the health disparities, the environmental injustice that takes place, how communities are divided up. Native American communities whose water systems were put in back in the 60s and 70s, investigations have now shown that they were using electrical conduit to drop in their water lines because they saved the company some money, pennies on the dollar. There's injustices like this that are taking place, and you look see where the dollars go to help get access to safe drinking water. The poor families now, especially look at California, when the electricity was cut off. If you have some money, you could probably go find somewhere to stay. But what happens if you don't? What happens to all that food in your refrigerator that you fought so hard that's now going to go bad? How are you going to feed your kids? How are you going to feed your families? And we need to talk about these injustices and disparities as it impacts our communities and where the dollars have gone and where they have not gone. The divides with broadband access, internet access, starting your own business, the homework divide, where you see children in poor communities, children especially in communities of color, where they're having to go to the local fast food joint or the local public library and sit outside in the dark all night long to get their homework done, because most homework is done now depending on online curriculum. We've got to close that gap. If you're not going to give people a head start or even a chance, how do we expect them to succeed? And I think that those are many areas where there are example upon example of where we need to stand up, speak up, and get something done, and make sure the American people hold their elected officials accountable. It's you know, you go put up ads and you talk about this stuff, you got to make sure that you're putting the policy to work and that you're checking those votes and you know whose side people are on. Those are the questions we need to be asking, holding people accountable.
Thank you. Let me open the floor to all of you. There's got to be a question now. Yes, in the very back, this gentleman.
That's Javier.
And did Javier put his hand up too? I knew you were going to. So we'll do these two real quick. Yes, sir.
Good morning. My name is David Morgan. I'm president of an organization called the Multicultural Media Correspondents Association. And we're in the 4th year of a call to action to move the needle on diversity. I first want to applaud the Hill for having this discussion. I think this is incredible, and I had to be here. And Congressman, I want to thank you for coming and lending your weight and support to this issue and what you're doing on the issue. I'd also like to acknowledge that, as you know, some of your colleagues like Mr. Cardenas and Ms. Clark and Ms. Chu started caucuses on media diversity, and Ms. Demings actually authored a resolution, as you know, reaffirming Congress's commitment to media diversity. So I think this is all great. So my question is, what is your view on how we can better collaborate and amplify so that we can sort of make this a more mainstream, national, and make more people understand the importance and that we are facing a media diversity crisis?
Thank you so much.
Well, so when it comes to diversity, we need to tell those stories, and there's no better partner than media partners as well. Now, I understand that our journalists, you have a job to do as well, and sometimes members of Congress will evade or try to scoot around, whatever it may be. But we should seek each other out and tell those stories. When there's information to be shared, when there's questions to be asked, when journalists that are leading the diversity conversation are asking for time, we should make ourselves available as well. I think that's going to be critically important in all of this. When I was the task force chair in diversity for the Congressional Hispanic Caucus back in 2014 or 13 and 14, this was something that was real important to me as well in holding corporate America, even the Obama administration, members of Congress, nonprofits, advocacy organizations accountable. You have to ask those tough questions. And when we're in the room together, we should be asking those questions and be asking for the transparency so that it can be reported upon as well. And then we lift all boats together. I think that's something we can do. But I'd be interested in your thoughts and ideas. Let's get a chance to sit down and chat a little bit and see how we can bring more people to this table and to the discussion.
Javier Palmeras.
Good morning. First of all, Steve, I see you're up to your old tricks of leading the discussion and really forcing us to deal with issues in a way that is very much like you've always been. So thank you for doing this. Secondly, Congressman, I have to tell you, first of all, I'm very biased. I'm a huge fan of you, the work you've done, the kind of American life that you've led, the service you provided to this country. So I'll begin there. Last night we talked about a wide array of issues, and one of them was this notion that we find ourselves today as a country, as a society, that when someone disagrees with you, particularly on the political side of things, we immediately kind of run to our corners, and the anarchy and the hatred is just pervasive. And this notion that somehow when someone believes something differently than we do, that we begin, and I'm guilty of this, that we begin to think of them as perhaps less American than I am. Because how could you not have the values that I've got? How could you possibly vote for that man or that ideology? How could you possibly back that perspective? I know that you've led from the front, and I want to thank you for your candor and your leadership on that front. But what do you suggest that we could do, and particularly you and your colleagues could do, to reach across the aisle to at least the handful of conservatives that still have a conscience, and try to work with them so that there's a little bit more kind of, an ability to work together as one Congress, not a divided Congress. It's a very difficult time, and we depend on people like you who have the strength and the track record to reach across the aisle and bring some of your colleagues on the other side to this side. Does that make sense? And,
yes, sir.
And what could you do for us?
Javier, we have to do what we're doing here. We have to talk to each other. Whether it's members of Congress to members of Congress or family member to family member. You know, holidays are around the corner. There's going to be families that are gathering. And you all know what conversations you all will proclaim that are out of bounds over that meal. We need to talk to each other. I still go back to some decisions that were made by Newt Gingrich, but that have not been corrected by Democratic leaders as well, including myself. When there was a decision made to shorten the work week in the halls of Congress and tell families they were going to go home as opposed to stay out here with members, when members were told that they were going to fly in on a Tuesday and go back to their districts on a Thursday, the conversations that typically took place on Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and Monday morning, which were with spouses, partners, and children over a ball game, if you're a person of faith, over a sermon, or maybe a meal where everyone would come together on Sunday afternoon. If you knew you had to face the family of those you were working with on a regular basis, you treated them with a little more respect and dignity because they were going to keep you in check. We need to find a way to bring that back, I think, to strengthen and to bring Congress back to a place where we're working together. And all of this was on full display this last week. The environment that's been established in our elections going into 2020, where it's WWF. You're either for the person wearing whatever the uniform is or the corner of the ring that they're in, or you're against them. And look, I didn't have any pride in the booing of the president this weekend. I have a lot of concern for the country when we have to investigate the commander-in-chief and consider one of the tools that were put in place by the founders of our young country to hold them accountable. Witnesses that are coming forward, Vietnam veteran, served our country, now in service to the State Department, that is being discredited. A lieutenant colonel that's coming today, Purple Heart, Iraqi veteran, who is being decimated through one outlet in America. What have we come to? And so, Javier, your question matters so very much. As we talk about the moral compass and the standing of America, I'll end it by how I started it. We have to be willing to talk to each other, look in the mirror, and see the example that we're setting on our own as well. But I'll tell you what, I will do everything that I can in my power to make sure that we do not have this president serving in the next 4 years. I don't know that our country can take it.
And with that, I want to say thank you for taking time to spend time with us. Such important issues.
Thank you.
Mexico. Not at all. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Ben Ray Luján. Thank you very much.